Hello and welcome to the Facts Matter podcast. I'm Guy Gordon, joined by Eric Lupher, president of the Citizens Research Council. Coming up November 3rd of this year, Michigan voters will be asked whether or not they want to hold a constitutional convention, also known as a con. This is something where they could do a top-to-bottom review and perhaps revision of specific articles of our Constitution, which we have had in its present form since 1963. Now, we've been breaking down with overviews, some history of this, and you can find those earlier podcasts at crcmich.org or at Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your hashtag Facts Matter podcast. Eric today is going to break down Article 2 for us, which looks at elections. Eric, hello.
Hello. It's great to be back with everyone.
Historically, this was not an article that would have gotten much attention in a constitutional convention, should we choose to have one, but this might be different this time around.
Yeah, having a provision, have an article in your constitution, your state constitution, saying that the citizens have the right to vote and this is how it'll work. In the case of Michigan and several other states allowing for initiative and referendum, you would say, well, that's a good thing to have in there. But sort of once you get past the question of should we have the initiative and referendum, it's sort of a ho-hum. But in recent years, this has taken on a much higher profile. The question that we're going to have on the ballot, separate from this con question, should we have stricter, higher standards for people proving that they're citizens to be able to qualify to vote? And over a couple cycles, we've put in a bunch of voting rights that have become touch points for many people. So all of a sudden, this article has taken on a much higher profile as we think about all of the reasons we might or might not want to convene a constitutional question and open up this document for what could be wholesale changes.
Well, in your fifth paper, you look at Article 2. It's quite comprehensive, but it really starts with the idea that there are parts of our Constitution which are no longer in sync or consistent with the federal Constitution, and those things may need a cleanup.
Yeah, this is something that could be done anytime. It could be done by amendment to the Constitution, and these have these just didn't pop up recently. They just don't have a high profile. They don't have a champion where anybody has said, well, let's just do something simple and amend the state constitution to say you're eligible to vote at 18 years instead of 21, or that you're able to vote on a property tax question regardless of whether you own property in the city or not. Or we also have in our Constitution term limits on our federal representatives in Congress, and the federal courts long ago said the U.S. Constitution sets the parameters for who qualifies to be in Congress, not state constitutions. So those are things that can be cleaned up really easy. We could have a constitutional convention to do it and be done within a day, or we could find a champion and say, well, let's just clean up our Constitution and make it consistent with real life.
Right.
And the fact that we've been operating without having, we just sort of ignore those things suggests that, so what?
Yeah. Interesting, though. I mean, I was surprised to find that at least according to our Constitution, you would have to reach the age of 21 before voting, and that has changed many years ago, but it still exists there, which shows you when you don't review it, since 63, you're going to have those things in there.
So the change was more recent than 63, but your point stands. This has been several decades that we've just gone along and got, we need people to open up that state constitution a little more often, especially some of our legislators who have the ability to put together a coalition among themselves and put the question on the ballot. Let's just make our constitution consistent with reality.
The Article 2 also has a section that sets forward the framework of voting rights. Who is eligible? Who qualifies? This has been a hot button issue with the SAVE Act being debated right now federally. Would this be right for review in your mind if we have a constitutional convention?
Well, I think it would certainly be a high profile item that the delegates would banter back and forth on. This is not an issue that's going away, whether Congress deals with the SAVE Act or not. As I mentioned, we have a separate question. We don't know for sure it'll be on the ballot in November, but at the state level, requiring higher level of attestation that you are a U.S. citizen, whether that's um, a birth certificate or what have you. So that will be a high profile item. But we also have a number of the other voting rights. Back in 2018 and then again in 2022, a number of rights were introduced into the state constitution. The amendments were called Promote the Vote and Promote the Vote 2, that really laid out the idea that your ballot is a secret ballot and put in a bunch of provisions to allow for no reason absentee voting, the ability to vote on a straight party ticket. So a lot of those things came in here. We had, as you would guess, Section 4 from the get-go. When the Section 4 was adopted as part of the 1963 Constitution, it was 111 words. And now with all these things added in those 2 election cycles, it's over 1,300 words.
Mm-hmm.
So we really blew up the idea that you have rights to vote in certain ways, that you have drop boxes available to you for your no reason absentee ballot,
right,
the security of your ballot, things like that.
Same day registration, also a provision of that.
Yeah, so again, some people find that really helpful. At no reason absentee balloting, the ability to vote from your living room or your kitchen table has really caught on in recent years, partly, I would guess, because of COVID. So a lot of people enjoy the rights provided in Section 4. But there are some people who, for whatever reason, think that's a problem and worry about the security of voting and will want to open up those types of sections, I would guess, if we were to have a constitutional convention.
Well, and I think there's already been legislation kicked around that is a state version of the SAVE Act, which would try to statutorily insert these things. The other thing is we've noticed kind of an evolution that's taken place at the Board of Canvassers, which is supposed to be nonpartisan or at least balanced in terms of its partisan makeup. That has changed in recent years. So that's something that could be addressed in the future.
Yeah, states have different ways of certifying that candidates are eligible to run for office, to look at the results of the elections and say, we can count all the votes and we'll certify these are the winners. And also as it relates to the initiative and referendum in Michigan. The 1963 Constitution, the delegates, I think in some ways in a very Pollyannish way, tried to say if we create equity in a very sort of cynically say apolitical way, that there's only Republican and Democratic parties in the world, say if we create equity among them with 110 House districts and 38 Senate districts and a whole bunch of commissions that have to be equally situated with 2 Republican and 2 Democrat, that they'll be forced to compromise and there will be, unicorns and rainbows. Life doesn't work that way. And the Board of State Canvassers has been one of the ways that we see that sometimes party has risen above compromise, and the members of those have tried to adhere to party fealty, even though the structure of Board of Canvassers is you count.
Right.
Did one one candidate get more votes than the other? Are there enough signatures on the petition to qualify for the ballot? And their ministerial role doesn't get into adjudicating the right words on it, things like that, but
Or challenges.
things right.
Yeah.
So, we might, a board of state, a con might say, well, this just isn't working. Let's do it different. And there's other states we could look at for doing it different. They might say, well, let's tighten it up. Let's make it what is already abundantly clear. Let's make it even more abundantly clear that the role of the Board of State Canvassers is a ministerial role, just attesting that this candidate won, or the petitions are valid, or what have you. So there's a couple ways con could go as it relates to the Board of State Canvassers.
Could they add a different commission, one that would address this idea of reviewing elections after the fact?
Yeah, they could certainly do that. We see in other states that, as it relates to initiative and referendum, the states get their, what we have our House and Senate fiscal agencies
Right.
involved in, would this break the bank or not? Let's provide a fiscal analysis so people understand what they're voting on. They get the Legislative Service Bureau in Michigan, and they have different names in other states, to make sure the wording is consistent with how we do things in Michigan, and it sort of passes legal muster in that way, adhering to the will of whoever is advocating for it, but make it consistent that way. They get their attorney generals involved in doing some sort of legal analysis of it. All those things can be political, so we're taking something that's already political and making it more so, but it helps the voters to understand. People who are involved in government, who understand how things work, have looked at this and said, we see an issue there, and then the groups could go back and rework it, or try to address those types of things. So there's a way to head it off, so you don't have to fall on this ministerial body, the Board of State Canvassers, to do things that are just beyond their charge, beyond their abilities.
Section 8 also covers, in Article 2, how we recall elected officials. And that's also evolved over time. It has been pretty rare in some instances, but ripe for review?
It will be ripe for review. Michigan cleaned this up a few years ago legislatively so we don't have as much willy-nilly recall efforts to, just let's let people do their job and get their foot in the door before you're already circulating petitions for recall, or if we're going to have an election in November, let's not do a recall vote in May.
Right.
So we did clean it up in some ways, but the intent of the section was to give people a voice, or a sort of a grassroots, that we don't think this elected official is representing the will of the voters, or there seems to be some sort of malfeasance or poor actions that don't represent the community well. And the courts have been very reluctant to allow many of those things to go forward. It was meant to be a political decision whether recall is necessary, and the courts have put very tight boundaries on that I think a con, if it were
Yeah.
convened, would want to look at closely and say, is this really how we want to do it?
Because the original intent was malfeasance, incompetence, neglect of office. Um, it wasn't something that you would use in a punitive sense against somebody because you didn't like how they voted on a particular issue.
Right. And the recall efforts have sort of covered the gamut. They tried to, I think the delegates in 1963 tried to keep it out of the courts, that this is a political question. Um, if somebody is locked up, then we have a different constitutional provision that says a convict can't be a public official. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of room to look at this and say, how can we do it better? And I think this will be a question that's ripe for close analysis.
We have seen Michigan voters passionately use other forms of direct democracy, the ballot initiative, ballot referendums. We've seen some that failed to make it in this cycle, but we have seen a lot of that, especially in instances where maybe the legislature or the governor just it was an issue that was kind of the third rail. They didn't want to touch it. Will that be something that would get a lot of attention in a constitutional convention? And
I
how?
think so. So Michigan has what's called an indirect initiative. We, the people, have the right to suggest, here's a law. Our legislature isn't moving on it. We think there's enough people who support that if we were to circulate petitions, we could get it on the ballot. And if the legislature just chose not to do anything with it, then we could vote on it. We ended up with casino gaming in Michigan and
Right.
in Detroit because of the initiative and the use of marijuana, other things. So it has come into play many times, but less so in Michigan than some other states that have the initiative. Part of the issue in Michigan that a constitutional convention will want to address is that indirect form. The indirectness is that once those petitions are certified, the question goes to the legislature, and they have a window of time
Right.
where they can choose to adopt it. It's not subject to gubernatorial veto. And what we see then is that sometimes the political parties have gamed the system, try to pass a law through the regular legislative process. It doesn't pass the governor vetoes it. It doesn't pass that part of the process. And then they go back and, well, let's get the petition signatures, which is a fairly low threshold, not inconsequential, but fairly low. Get it introduced that way, and then the legislature can adopt it, and the governor now can't veto it. So do we want it to work that way? We also have in the Constitution the provision for referendum. If the legislature enacts a law that a number of people say, well, that's not what we wanted, you don't think you're representing the interest of our state, they can again circulate petition signatures and recall or do the referendum saying, should this in fact go into effect as a law in Michigan? When they put that into the Constitution, they said, well, you can't do that for appropriations. You could imagine what happens if you do that. Then our appropriation for the Department of Treasury or corrections or something subject to a referendum, and you just can't function in government that way. So they tried to make it clear this is just for everything else, but not for how we fund state government. That provision has been bastardized in some ways, that the legislature, when they're dealing with a controversial topic, will just put in a token appropriation, and then it's not subject to referendum. And so these are the types of things that that a constitutional convention, I think, will want to say, first of all, do we want to keep the initiative referendum?
Right.
We've had it for a long time in Michigan. It's been used in many ways. Do we want to keep it or not? And if so, how can we clean it up to deal with some of these side issues, these sort of annoyance issues that make the system not always work as pure, as clean as as was intended when they wrote the Constitution in the 60s.
Any other elements that you think that might be curious or that voters should know about that could either open a can of worms or maybe open something that needs to be addressed?
No, I mean, I go back to where we started. That if we would have had this question, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, you can look back. We've done these analyses for the CONCON every 16 years. You can go back 16 years ago, and our paper on Article 2 was fairly short because it was just not, there just wasn't that much meat there. And this time around, it has become a much more high-profile issue, and a lot of people will have strong feelings about whether we need a constitutional convention to address many of the provisions in this article.
Right. Well, that wraps it up for Article 2. We will tackle Article 3 in another podcast down the road. We'll look at just the general government, and it's kind of a catch-all article in our Constitution, very rarely amended. But there are some things that may get some attention, especially when it comes to something like transparency, and we'll explore that in the next edition of our Facts Matter podcast. Eric, thank you very much. Oh, and before we go, Eric, we should take note of the fact that we've got a Centennial Plus 10 that we're celebrating at the CRC.
Yeah, the doors opened in 1916, April 13th of 1916, and so this is, we're coming up real quickly on our 110th anniversary, and a lot of good work over that 110 years, and in a year where we're dealing with constitutional convention questions and other ballot issues, and things like data centers and property tax reform and everything else. You can really see the value of having an independent, nonpartisan group like the Citizens Research Council working for the citizens to give them the information to be informed voters, informed participants in our democracy.
Indeed. And so we invite you to go to crcmich.org, perhaps donate to support the work of the Citizens Research Council, this kind of unbiased research that is fact-based, and again, that dedicated to the notion that facts do matter and that they should drive policy, not politics. Eric, thanks very much. We'll see you next time.
The Citizens Research Council of Michigan has been providing lawmakers, academics, the media, philanthropists, business leaders, voters, and all Michiganders with factual, unbiased, independent information on significant issues concerning state and local government organization and finance. For over a century, our research is available to you. Go online at crcmich.org and on all the social media platforms, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and download our research. Check out our numerous papers and blogs, and listen to our podcasts. And while you're there, please consider supporting our research with a donation. This has been a Facts Matter podcast, a presentation of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan.